Welcome to DataVids. We're going to learn how to use Dapper. Now this video is not going to so much show you what Dapper is. Instead, it's going to show you how to use Dapper step by step in Visual Studio 2022. All right, well thank you for watching and let's begin. I have here a .NET 7 console application. You can do these steps with another template such as MVC or API. However, I'm going to demonstrate this with the console application so there's less overhead and less to look at, and you'll still learn the exact same thing and apply it the exact same way. Now, in my example, I'm going to use MySQL, but there is very little difference between MySQL and SQL Server. One difference, though, that you do want to pay attention to if you're using SQL Server is the NuGet package for SQL Server is going to be Microsoft.data.sql client. So go to your developer PowerShell and you're going to change directory to make sure that you're in your project folder and not just your solution folder, unless you've chosen to have your project and solution be in the same folder. Great. Now we're going to go ahead and do .NET add package MySQL connector. Press return or enter for you modern folks. All right. Next, just press up and we'll change MySQL connector to be Dapper. Now you've got Dapper and MySQL connector installed. It's time to get connected to a database. So there's many ways to store a connection string. A very popular way is to use appsettings.json. People like to use secrets when they're using it on a local machine, and they like to use the Azure Key Vault sometimes if you want to pay for that service when you're storing it in the cloud. For the purpose of this application, we're just going to make it an environment variable. So we're going to get a connection string, and we're going to get it from environment.getEnvironmentVariable connection string. Now, to set a connection string for the project, right click on the project and go to properties, go down to debug, click on debug general, and then you're going to click on open debug launch profiles UI. You'll see about halfway down environment variables. Paste in connection string, and now you're going to give it a value that's a basic connection string to your database. Now, the connection string is going to be very dependent, of course, on your database, so I can only help so much with that, but I think there's a couple websites out there that help you generate a connection string. In my case, I'm connecting to the local host with a root username, but that obviously wouldn't be good for production, and it's going to be a little different if you're using SQL Server, and it's going to be a little different if you have set up a different username that has limited access, etc., etc. Okay. Now I think go to the bottom here. We can close this out, save everything, go to program, and let's just make sure this environment variable is working before we go further. So I've set a breakpoint and hit F5. Build succeeded. Now we're running, hit our breakpoint. If I hover on connection string, I can see that I've pulled out that environment variable. Connection string is one thing, we need the actual connection. So let's do using var connection equal to new MySQL connection, and we'll pass into it the connection string. Now we're ready to make our first Dapper command. I believe we should start with an insert, and then we'll do a select, then we can do other things like update and delete, and then talk about some of the other features that it has. Let's build a query for this insert. So I'm going to do var SQL is equal to, and I'll use the @ sign for a multi-line query, and we're going to put parameters in here. There are several different types of parameters that Dapper accepts. I like to use the anonymous parameters, so I'm going to show you those here. So we can do an insert statement. I went to Workbench and I went ahead in my database. I created a clouds table and I created an insert statement and I tested it here. So if you're in SQL Server, you might want to test it in SSMS or whatever. Build your SQL query or your MySQL query, make sure it works. Then go back to Visual Studio and just paste it in here. You can hit tab to get it back over so it looks kind of nice, format it how you want it. Don't use string interpolation here. That doesn't work well with um, Dapper. It does work with other ORMs. I realize that. Anyways, so we're not going to put hard-coded values in here. We're going to put parameters. So all you have to do is replace using the @ sign. So I've got a shape column, which is a string, and I've got a CNON column, which is a date time. I'll replace my string column with the @ sign shape, not sharp, and I'll replace the CNON column with the @ sign CNON. I don't know, that formatting might look a little funky to you. Maybe you like it like this better. Okay, so when I said I was going to use anonymous parameters, that means we're going to create an anonymous object here. So let's call it parameters. And that's going to be equal to a new anonymous type. And let's do shape equal to, and we'll define it. Let's call it, my previous cloud shape I used was, or my previous cloud shape was a boot. Why don't we make this one a cat? And CNON, let's do, how about datetime dot now dot add days, let's say -1. We saw it yesterday. It's time to execute this. So if you want to see the number of rows that were affected, like for instance, if this was an update instead of an insert, then we would want to capture the return value of execute. So I do var result equal to connection.execute, etc. But in this case, we don't have anything that we particularly need to get the number of rows affected. So I'm just going to call it directly. We'll do connection.execute, pass in your query, and then add a comma, and we'll put in the parameters. I'm going to hit F5 to run it, just to make sure we don't get any errors. It's finished running. Hit that last breakpoint. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my workbench, and I'm going to select from that table. Oh, hit F5 like I was in SQL Server. How about that? As you can see, cat was the result. And yesterday at this hour, which my computer set to UTC time for some reason, but it is yesterday. So everything worked as planned. We've got an auto increment ID in this table, and a default value on this is active row. So that's why I only had to specify these two. Success. Let's do a select statement. These are going to be a little bit more interesting, and that's where you can really see the power of Dapper coming into play. Now, in order to select this data out into anonymous type, we don't have to specify a whole lot, but I would like to specify a model to populate with this. So let's go ahead and create a new class. Add class. We call it clouds. And I want to have all the same properties in this class that we have columns in the database. So prop, we'll do int ID, prop, we'll do string, and I believe we had cloud or shape, we'll do prop, date time, and I think it was scene on. You notice I'm using camel case here where it was lowercase in the database. Some MySQL databases have settings where it wants everything to be lowercase. Not a big deal. .NET and Dapper is still going to map the objects to these properties, no problem. And I believe I had an isActive row. Prop, tab, tab, bool, tab, tab, isActive. Save that. I'm just going to remove the entire insert section. I don't want to end up with duplicates or anything like that. We can reuse this connection if we had two statements because this using statement keeps it open till the end of the block. Anyways, let's go ahead and define the query for our select statement. So we're going to have the @ sign again, and we're going to do select star. You can list out the column names if you want, of course, from clouds, the table name, where, and now we can do ID equal to ID. You notice I made this one a capital I. Really doesn't matter, but it allows me to have a capitalized property name, which is best practices. Let's specify our parameters. Parameters is equal to new, capital I, lowercase d. And let's make it a 2 since it was the second record and I had an auto increment ID and it had the seed of 1. And we don't need any other parameters. And now we can go ahead and query this. So let's do results. And that is going to be connection dot query, and you can see the list of commands available here. I often use the query single, and I often just use the query async if it's an async method or a query. We are going to do query single. If you see query multiple, that is not for multiple records in the results. That's for executing multiple statements at once and putting the results into a grid type structure. Let's do query single. Now, if I wanted the anonymous type, I would just use it like this, and I put the brackets, start specifying the query, etc. But instead, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to specify that I want it to return an object of type clouds, which we just defined in our model. Now I can put the brackets, I can put the SQL for our connection string, put a comma, and we'll specify the parameters. And let's go ahead and run that. If you hover over results, you'll see it gave us a result of type clouds, and it had the 4 columns. The auto increment ID is active true, which is a bool, seen on, which was yesterday, and the shape, which is a cat. Great. Let's change this to see multiple results. So instead of query single, just take the word single off of there. And I'm going to remove this where clause because there's only 2 records. I want to get them both. And let's run it again. Hover over results. There are 2 records in the results. And they're what we expected. There's the boot. There's the cat. Good deal. Update statement is going to be probably pretty much the same as what you're expecting, but I'll do it real quickly anyways. Let's just change this right here. Update clouds set, and now we just got to pick one of our columns. And just looking at this, not that interesting of a table, I guess the most interesting thing to change would be the shape. So we'll set the shape equal to our parameter. Let's call it new shape. And we'll set our parameter new shape. And of course, this will probably be a variable from your code somewhere, but I'm just going to hard code something here. Let's put rat. And now, instead of the connection returning a cloud, it's going to return an integer. So let's just do connection dot execute. We don't want them all to be rats. Put a where clause here. Say ID equal to, I guess we'll add another parameter. ID 2. And we'll execute this. And hover over results, 1. There was 1 record change, so the result is 1. So we've done insert, select many, or not, we've done insert, select many. I'm gonna call it many since Dapper has select multiple. We don't get confused. Now we've done update. We haven't done a delete. I could literally just change this to be delete and remove this part. Delete clause where ID equals ID. And we could remove the first parameter from, sorry about that. So now if I come back into MySQL, there's only one record. Big thing to show you is transactions. There are a few different ways to do transactions. As you can see on the screen, I held down Control Z. I did undo until our previous insert was back on the screen. But for transactions, there's a few different ways. I could make a video just on transactions, but I just want to show you guys the most basic way. And if you want to see more transactions, ways of doing transactions in Dapper, just let me know and I could make a video on that potentially. But let's do an old school using here so that we can have a shorter block scope just so I can emphasize something that will make sense here in a minute. So let's do using var trans for transaction equal to connection dot begin transaction. So we'll go ahead and have a single insert statement and we'll execute it, but we're not going to commit this transaction yet, just so you can see what happens. I'm going to have two insert statements actually. Or we could use the same insert with just two sets of parameters. How's that sound? So we'll insert the cat, and then let's insert, I don't think we've used the dog yet, and we'll put that just regular datetime.now so that the data is a little different. Parameters is already defined. So I'm going to insert these two records without doing a, that's not a method, without doing a transaction.commit. So we should expect there to be no error, but also no insert. Nothing actually saved to the database, right? There are a couple things that need to happen when we do transactions this way. One is we have to open the connection. So let's go ahead and do connection.open. It's something you didn't need when we didn't have the transaction, right? It did it for you. Dapper did it for you. The other thing is down here in the execute statement, we have to specify which transaction this connection is using. So add a comma, and we'll specify trans there. Same thing here. Trans there. Let's go ahead and run it. F5. It's finished running. I'm going to go back to MySQL. We should not expect to see those rows. And they're not there. That's great. So what that means is that because we didn't commit this, it automatically took care of it with the dispose at the end of this block. That's why I did the old school using, was just to show you that once we left this block here, because we hadn't yet committed it, it's automatically rolled back in the dispose. So same thing as would happen if an exception was thrown before you got to your commit statement, is it would just be rolled back. In the old days, we had to do transaction.rollback, right? But Dapper takes care of that. So the next thing to do, obviously, if we want this to work, is going to be our transaction, which is trans.commit. So let's go ahead and run that. Come back to Workbench, run our select, and as you can see, it added both cat and dog with IDs 5 and 6. Before you turn off this video, really quickly, I want to show you guys two websites that's going to show you your next level of Dapper stuff. I've shown you all the basics, insert, select, update, delete, and transaction, and I could show you more transaction stuff, but there is more to Dapper. They even have extensions for Entity Framework now. But if you go to github.com/dapperlib, I'm not associated with this code, but I just wanted to show you it's kind of neat. Scroll to the bottom, you'll see they got some interesting examples and some documentation here. If you go to the top, you can actually clone this code. They even have some test projects in there that you can run. Some of it's in .NET Framework. It's not all in .NET Core, but it's the same stuff basically. The other thing is this website I found, which again I'm not associated with this one either, learndapper.com/, actually I was one too far in, learndapper.com. In here you can see what's available with Dapper Plus. I believe that might be a paid product, I'm not sure, but there's some additional things in here that I didn't talk about, like the multiple results set, the bulk insert, etc., etc. That's it for today. Go build some cool stuff. Thanks for watching DataVids.